Jason Rzucidlo reporting inside the Detroit Marriott at the Renaissance Center for a special meeting of the Detroit Economic Club. And stay tuned for remarks from Dr. Ed Catmull. He's the president and co-founder of the Pixar Animation Studios. He's also the president of the Walt Disney Animation Studios.
Good afternoon. Automation World Magazine called today's guest speaker a super genius, and for good reason. He's a 5-time Academy Award winner who turned the computer graphics industry on its ear. Inspired as a youth by Disney's Peter Pan, he found a way to make the screen come alive through the use of his digital effects. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Edwin Catmull, President and co-founder of Pixar Animation Studios and President of Walt Disney Animation Studios. Please welcome Dr. Edwin Catmull.
It's actually my first time in Detroit. I'm a season ticket holder for the Giants. For the first time, I actually have serious tickets, but you take precedence. So Pixar's about 25 years old, and we spun out of Lucasfilm. And along the way, both at Lucasfilm, where I was at school, I tried to have a better understanding of what the issues were with creativity, technical innovation. And what I want to do is give some of the things I've seen from the point of view of being in the film industry. Some things may be unique to the film industry, some things I think are not. But I want to go over some of the lessons that were learned. What is surprising to a lot of people is that Pixar actually started as a manufacturing company. There was no digital film animation industry at all when we started. So this was a dream, it was a side project that we had that we were pushing on. It's what our love was, but the business was a computer that we could design, and we're selling to medical institutions, to government. We sold a lot to Disney, and then into a contract to write software for them. But at that time we had to learn a lot about manufacturing, and to learn about DEMing and understand what those principles meant. And at that time, one of the companies we looked at closely was Toyota. And the general principle there that we gleaned from it was that we find problems early and fix them. Very simple. With a lot of buzzwords that we saw, but what it really came down to was find it early, fix it, push the responsibility down as far as you can. For me, these were fairly deep things which we learned from. We also learned things from Disney, because we had people in from Disney, and Lucasfilm had some techniques for how they managed the process of putting it together. So what we did was an amalgamation of things that we learned from each one of these. At the same time, though, while we were a struggling company, and Steve Jobs was our investor, he was losing a lot of money on us. We were going negative every year. It's a very stressful time in my life. And we're just this little tiny group trying to survive. But I got friends in Silicon Valley. We're at the edge of Silicon Valley. Jim Clark was founded in Silicon Graphics and Netscape. John Warnock founded Adobe. And we were very close to the people at Sun Computer. So at this time, there was this big swirl in the industry, just as there is now in the internet. What was the same energy of dynamism at that time. And there was a pattern that I could see happening as a little company that wasn't making it decide. The pattern was that somebody would get a creative idea. They would get all of the people around to solve the problems they needed. They had some good execution. They became very successful selling the hardware and the software. Now they had the best engineers. They had access to the customers and to their needs. The CEO got his picture on the cover of Fortune magazine. It's all part of the pattern. And then the company would do something incredibly stupid. So the question was, why do companies do stupid things at the top of their game? Now, when I say they were stupid, I mean, they weren't like, I'm looking back on it and say they did a stupid thing. I'm looking at it while they're doing it, as well as my colleagues saying, are they nuts? And the answer frequently was no, yes. You know, something had gone wrong, and it was visible, and they were still making these mistakes. We were watching Disney Animation at the time when they had this heyday where the film started to do very well, and now we had a contract with them at the time for doing software, so we had an inside view, and I was amazed at how there was no introspection. And ultimately, that group went over the cliff. And then recently, of course, we saw with Toyota this incident over the brakes, when they made some wrong decisions about how they worked with that problem when it was discovered. So the question was, okay, what happens to a company such that they go against deeply ingrained cultural values? It's clear that something is going wrong and that really smart people are missing those problems. And these are people, I'll say, that are smart, they build it, in theory they have the view of it. So whatever these forces are, they were very subtle and they were very strong. And these people were missing those things that were necessary for their survival. So I operate under the assumption that those forces are acting now at Pixar and at Disney, and that I can't see them. Right, and I think that's true in general, and a lot of people choose not to see that. So for me, the personal question I had was, at the time when we were not successful, was if we ever got to that point, would the same thing happen? And what are the things that we can learn to see the things that, for some reason, are eluding people? Now, we tried to figure out what these factors were originally, and I won't go through all of them because I've only got a short amount of time here. But one of these beliefs we had was that, since we're making movies, that the story is the most important thing in the movie. And if I tell that to people, like this is one of our foundational principles, most people will nod their head that that's an important foundational principle for what we're doing. So we use that as one of our anchors, and we talked a lot about it. Story is the most important thing. And then I made an odd discovery. I found I was listening to people in other studios, and I found that everybody said in the movie industry that the story is the most important thing. It didn't matter whether they were making wonderful new movies or absolute crap. They all said story is the most important thing. So I thought, okay, clearly what's happening here is that it's easier to say something than it is to do it. And so, as soon as you say something which is true, people will they'll say that. It doesn't affect their behavior, but they'll say the correct things, which means you can never tell by what people say. So I stopped saying it. And then a couple of years ago, I was meeting with a professor from Harvard Business School, and she was telling me about a friend of hers who was working down in Hollywood and had made this phenomenal discovery that made what the difference was, whether or not the company understood that the story was the most important thing. So I talked a little about that. But as I was driving home, I just realized something. And that was that movies are stories. And that to say story is the most important thing is a tautology. It actually doesn't even have any meaning. It's like story is the most important thing in a story. That's what it is. So, but as I was going through these, in fact, when we were building Pixar, I was reading a lot of business books, and what I found was that there wasn't a lot of content, most of it. So I thought, well, if there's not a lot of content, why don't I get one of those subscription services where they pull out the jewels from each one, and I'll just read that. So I did, and I read these summaries, and when I read the summaries, there wasn't anything there